CEO of the Access Control Collective, which is a digital-first media organization. Electronic access control started in 1973, and for the past 30 years, it had a single value proposition: was keep bad people out.
And then more recently, Carrier sold its security business to Honeywell.
The laws of the jungle exist here too, predominantly because Apple didn't open up their NFC. All of a sudden, now they've opened it up. Everybody now is having the ability to take your badge and put it in your phone. I've written that I've called Omdia's market sizing of ours garbage. It's not going away. Everyone will have it. Now we have to start talking about what are we going to do with it.
Welcome back to another episode of The Download with Joe. I'm looking forward to this one because we have never done an episode on access control, which is a bit of a mystery, but there's no better person to have on the show than Lee Odess. So welcome to the pod, Lee.
Thank you, guys. Big fan of what both of you do independently and then also here, so thank you.
Vice versa. Obviously, our network and the majority of our community is very heavy on smart buildings, energy efficiency, controls. I imagine there will be quite a few individuals that listen to this or watch this that know who you are, but just for the benefit of starting the podcast, can you give us like a 30,000 foot overview?
Sure. Yeah, happy to, and I appreciate it. CEO of the Access Control Collective, which is a handful of brands that focus on the access control and security industry. Think of us as a digital-first media organization. We have things we do online, like I have my own sort of personality, if you would, around the access control space, and we produce a written brief. We have a Slack community, and we create a bunch of content that puts out over LinkedIn. We also put on events our own, as well as activate at third-party events like the ISC West show and Intersect. So we activate and partner with them there. And then we work with a bunch of brands to create content and information as well. And then we've recently started to move in to produce for other people as well that want to, within the security or security adjacent space, to produce for them also, whether it's the newsletters they want to do, podcasts, videocasts, and then also bring that network of personalities to the market. So with events, like we'll bring all of them to an event and help get word out around whatever they're interested in and the marketplace has interest in. That's where we're focused on. And it shows up in the access control executive brief is probably the biggest name underneath ours that we have, that's really where we focus majority of my time and energy is there.
Mm-hmm. And the access control brief is just a periodical, is basically focus the strategy behind a lot of the access control and security developments in the market. Is that, I'm sure there's more, but
so the access control industry, like everything else is going through digital transformation. And so we write about the changes that are happening, as well as I track like 600 companies globally. And historically, since we've been so hardware focused, it was very regional focused, but not really much of a global view. So we've taken a global view of tracking the changes and what's going on, as well as driving a global community of an industry that waited for trade shows to happen till we got together. And then there's this thing called the internet where we can all, do what we're doing currently right now. And we're bringing that to the market. I write a newsletter. It's gated. We have a Slack group. And then I also do in-person stuff and create more content for that community.
Maybe before we get into some interesting overlaps between smart buildings and building IoT and then access control, and we'll get into that. But I guess given your lens, looking at the digital transformation of security and access control companies, the changes, the M&A, the investments that have been happening, maybe just a couple quick takeaways of how would you describe how the access control and security market is changing over the past, 5 or so years?
Sure. Yeah. So I would summarize it as if you think about electronic access control started in 1973. And for the past 30 years, it had a single value proposition: was keep bad people out, lock and unlock the doors. That's it. That's all we had to do. And we did a really good job of it, frankly. If you look globally, realistically, although bad things do happen, by percentages, I would tell you we've done a really nice job. And it's been a utility that has been isolated because it's a heavy amount of risk. Like, who wants to be the person that's like, I'll take on the risk of somebody getting shot or stabbed? And they're like, nah, it's fine. Give it to the department of people that are experts. And, the value proposition, as long as it doesn't change and no one gets shot or stabbed, we're cool. Like, we'll have iterative change over the next 30 years. Well, around COVID time, like everyone else in the world, there was a lot of disruption and change. You had things like the internet, you had cloud-based systems, you saw consumerization come into it, SaaS tools, the rest of it. And frankly, what I think a lot has happened is the shift of the expectation of the system went from keeping bad people out to also letting the right people in. And in order to do that, you had to have a layer of technology, because historically it was just cards and fobs. That's what people used to get in. We didn't know who the people were. We couldn't really do anything. Now, with the transition to mobile and biometrics and some of these other things, we want to know who that person is, whether they should be there or not. And then also wrap things around them, like, operational efficiencies, revenue generation opportunities, understanding, dwell time, understanding utilization, maybe turn lights off at things when people aren't in there, whatever it might be. There's an expectation. So then an infusion of, sort of a transition happening, also seeing that it's been primarily on-site project-based business. Capital markets come in and say, hey, we can flip this thing into reoccurring. We'll just sprinkle some, money on top of it, and everyone goes like this and we're on. And then they realize it's a lot harder than that. But because of it, we've seen it come into that marketplace. We've also had big tech come in now. So you've got everyone from Apple, Google, Samsung, Amazon coming in and bringing an entirely different, I joke, I say they have two things, time and money, that they bring into the marketplace. And really what they bring a lot of time is user experience, or turning our industry into a feature of a larger value proposition. So there's a lot of pressure on the old truths of the industry and new ones coming in, and a reimagination of what our industry can be doing and should be doing. So you see new entrants come in. You see a bunch of organizations within our industry start to break off to go after the larger marketplace. We've done some numbers, and the numbers we came up with is like a $60 billion market versus what Omdia says is a high security $10 billion market. So that delta, though, is moving beyond just high security of a cottage industry into more of a mainstream one. But then you have a large group that's basically not doing anything. And frankly, just, you can iterate for the next 20 years and see 5% growth. Everybody gets bonuses. Everybody's happy. But, all the things you're seeing in the marketplace are coming true of ours. The space we can occupy is the fact that we are a utility that goes into a building, and it's our opportunity to deliver also safety and security, because I don't care how good the lattes are that you can order in an app. If I'm not safe and I don't feel safe, I'm not going to go into that thing. So either companies in our space have to deliver the more mainstream modern things, or people are coming in layering technology on top of it in order to deliver that to a much more demanding customer base.
Makes sense. When it comes to innovation and technology, when we think about the building automation segment or control segment, there's often the perception and frustration from a lot of people in this space that see big incumbents kind of holding the industry back, like stifling growth or innovation or technology adoption. Would you say there's similar occurrences in access control, or over the last 5 to 10 years there's been differences?
The laws of the jungle exist here too. It's no different, right? So all those things are true. And the way I would look at it is that I've said and written that there's two things that have held back our industry, which I do think relates to smart buildings too. I mean, I started my career with Lutron from the lighting control side in the smart building side of the business as well. So spend a decent amount of time in the space that I feel like I can at least relate to it. There's two things: incentives and demographics. So the way that the incumbent access control industry was set up was to manage a 5 to 8% growth rate, right? And in order to do that, you don't really change a whole lot. You add some things, but you iterate to go do it. And it creates an environment where innovation is, moderately done. And then, you have some new people come in and try some things that force them to go, but they're most of the incumbents are not doing it on their time. For instance, cloud, when I worked at Brevo, with the original access control company that had cloud, I mean, we've been around forever. And we were in the back, it took COVID to drive all of a sudden this desire to adopt it, because the value creation of having cloud superseded let's call it the risk of implementing new, or the value proposition that was demanded. It just made a lot more sense because the architecture gave to the value that was needed to be delivered. So it took like a major event for that to happen. So that stuff exists with us. There is a group that is breaking off, that I'll give them credit for, that is adding cloud, adding mobile, adding AI. I I still give them a hard time just because they're adding it on like a feature of a larger value proposition versus saying that this is architecture and the value that it's creating. Whereas these new ones that come in build with that stuff, and it's about the value that they deliver. So that's why you see somebody like a Verkada, for instance, come out of nowhere, do like 700 million, and you can't tell me they took all of that from the legacy business. No, they created more opportunity. So it's no different than the others, but it's better. And I focus on the incumbents that want to make change, and I focus on the new people that are coming in. And I've sort of changed my narrative where I don't get as cranky about it anymore that they're not doing it. And it's sort of like it's inevitably going to be larger at some point. The question is when. And yeah.
Yeah, that actually is an interesting kind of quick segue, because I would argue same thing is happening with buildings IoT or smart buildings or just operational tech to decarbonize and digitize buildings. One topic I wanted to talk with you about a little bit, and just to tee it up, there's in some cases a lot of overlap from the vendor of we provide access control solutions and we provide energy and building control solutions. A good example would be JCI. I used to work at JCI. When I was there, they didn't have a great security and access control product, but there was kind of an old, I think P2000 was the brand name. They ended up selling a lot of their business, both car batteries. Most people didn't know this, but most of JCI's business, at least 10 years ago, was car batteries, maker of car batteries. Like 20% of the revenue, I think, was that, 20, 30%. And then 50% was interior, like interiors of cars, like seats and car interiors. And that's been spun off into a completely separate business. They then went and bought Tyco. Tyco, obviously a huge name in access control. But around the same time, Trane used to be owned by Ingersoll Rand. Ingersoll Rand was mostly Trane, but they also made air compressors. They had some other businesses. I think bike locks, they had a business that did bike locks. They did club car. So a bunch of different industrial businesses. They spun out all the access control capabilities into Allegion, and then they, I think, rebranded into Trane, and then everything that wasn't Trane became a separate business, which is now doing its own thing with, I think, Gardner Denver, and they merged. So anyway, so you have like one company, we want more security, one company, we want to get rid of this, and then more recently, Carrier sold its security business to Honeywell. So it went from one known name in smart buildings to another known name. And then you have Siemens also continues to be a player. We'll talk about this, but they've been launching some interesting products on the security side. So I guess those are not all the security and access control heavy hitters, but that is kind of all of the heavy hitters, or many of the heavy hitters on the smart building side. And they seem to have very different views of how strategic is security and access control. And I would love to just riff on that a little bit with you and just get your take.
I think sometimes we're in love with the technology, like we all are, and me included, that we also sometimes forget like business fundamentals. Like I actually think some of this is driven primarily by the financial opportunities that exist of the capital and the utilization of it, regardless of whether they like the tech or not. If you think about like Carrier, access control is having a moment at the time, and they saw an opportunity. Think about it, they sold this thing for, I think it was like 4.6 or something like $1 billion, right?
Yeah.
And he simplified his business. So he got massive cash, simplified his business, and could execute a strategy and plan to actually go buy other entities that in my opinion, I think simplify. Like that's like legendary. Like his return to his investor base in the market, that's like legendary business stuff that like he just did on that. He took and on top of it, he found a buyer who, if you go back, needed it because they sold off Residio and ADI and all that stuff, right? Honeywell owned all of that. So they went from having a massive security practice to all of a sudden having basically none. Like they went from a big player to a small player with a big player name and an older product in like unpack and some of those things. And they bolted on, which would be one of the larger enterprise systems that exist that has moderate international growth, and Honeywell has large international opportunity outside of North America. So like it fit better. It found the right home to where it could go do the things or have the opportunity. I talk about the jury's still out whether they'll allow it to do the things that it needs to go do that, but it's in a better position where it currently is because the incentive structures have changed, where prior was just milk this cash cow to where now it's like, all right, invest in it because we got to get an ROI on a a $4.6 billion thing until we restructure or whatever happens every 5 years at Honeywell type of thing, right? So like, I think it has a lot to do with that. I think it has a lot to do with the vision that you have around things like data and annuity type businesses too, very sticky. I think it has a lot to do with what your customer base is asking for on a long-term roadmap, to where you would make some decisions of, whether you want to simplify or you want to expand and bring the portfolio. The word I'm saying of the year for 2025 that I'm seeing, and I think it relates to smart building, it's like platform. Like we're hearing that more in our area, to where you offer more than one thing as it moves more towards software. Yeah.
Are you talking specifically about one vendor? Because when I first started in this space, the key term everyone was talking about, especially when we worked with companies like JCI or Train or Siemens, was turnkey projects, right? Where it was like access control, controls, lighting, like all of the above. Whereas I think now the controls world, the smart buildings world, with choice, whilst end to end, or like a SPOG, as people used to call them, is available. Like people are also open to having multiple different vendors, which makes the best solution.
Yeah, so I think it's about the flexibility. So I'll relate it to the enterprise software world, where take Salesforce. They're predominantly known for CRM, but they have like 4,000 things you could turn on to create the solution that you need. Or they've created the ability for you to plug in. If I don't want Buddy Media, I can bring HubSpot in, right? Like, so they allow you the ability to have choice, but then they also, depending on the type of buyer you are, you can decide, how many knobs you want to turn on with them, or how many knobs do you want to connect from the outside. I think that is not only going to happen, it is happening in how we define security and access control, to where it's video is also going to be about access, which is also going to be about identity physically, which is also going to be about alarm and all these things, to also being, let me also connect sensors and let me connect these things, where it may give you a simplified version of it, or you just plug in somebody. And I don't know, I'm bullish on thinking that because of that model of more of like an enterprise software look versus an IoT, which is, whether we like it or not, predominantly comes from a hardware standpoint, then moves into software. I think if it comes from a software standpoint, it will drive the hardware to support the software solution that you want, versus what we've been doing, which is, here's the hardware we need, and then software is the feature of it, right? Like, I just think that shift will help move it further along.
In buildings, you definitely have the case where, like, we're buying controls for our building because we have to have controls, we have to have thermostats on the wall, and then the software becomes a bit of the afterthought. One quick comment just to wrap up what you were saying earlier. I absolutely agree with you, Lee, that these different companies, while you could bucket them all as, oh, you're an HVAC company or you're a controls company, they actually have very different strategies as it relates to going to market. Honeywell is a great example in that they've really always been known, to me at least, and to others in the industry, as a collection of really solid brands, but are a little bit less cohesive. You tend to think of, there's still a lot of brands that Honeywell has owned for a long time that it isn't really obvious that they're part of Honeywell, unless you look at one page at the very bottom, it just says copyright Honeywell International. For them, I think buying good businesses that just fit into generally the industries they're already living in and working in, that makes a lot of sense. You could look at a Carrier, and they have become a lot like Train in that there's really just two parts of their business now. There's transport refrigeration, right? So like shipping the ice cream and the vegetables and the milk place to place. And that's refrigeration technology, which is very similar, of course, to HVAC. And HVAC, they are just the two probably leaders from residential all the way up to very large commercial buildings. Then you got JCI, which interestingly is more now just of an applied type HVAC company with a lot of controls and a lot of other things to go into it. The most interesting part of this, I would argue, is they're all making somewhat similar acquisitions on the software side, despite the fact that, outside of access control and security, but, 4 of them have bought CMMS players. But I agree with you. They generally look the same at a 30,000 foot level, but when you actually look at them, the go-to market, the approach, what they are really good at is a little different, which I think fits in with what you were saying.
I think it's also fair to say they look like whatever angle you come at as well.
That's true. Yeah.
So that's the other part, is like, it's multi-dimensional. Like, to me, they're security companies that happen to also do HVAC sometimes, but when in reality, they, to you, they're HVAC doing security on the side. So yeah, so I think it just depends on which side you go after.
Well, and there's this broader theme of just companies trying to simplify, right? Like even GE is now 3 separate companies: energy, aerospace, and then healthcare, I think, is the kind of the third. Whereas before they were kind of the best, most well-known conglomerate. There is some news out there that Honeywell might split into 2. One is the aerospace business. and the other is automation. But automation is basically everything that is in aerospace. And there's a bunch of other examples. Yeah.
When you have not an angry investor, what's it called, coming in
An
telling you what
activist
to do.
investor. Yeah.
An activist. There you go.
And Elliott is the activist investor there, which pushed JCI, interestingly, to sell the light commercial and residential HVAC business to Bosch. So, yeah.
Just on the, going back to something you said earlier about systems and technology, you're probably aware, but in the smart building space, like there's often a debate around open and closed systems and connecting them. Like you're talking about Salesforce and being able to maybe use different applications, whether you want a different CRM or maybe you're choosing a different device, whereas it can be difficult if you're tied into one of the larger incumbents. Like, is that similar to access control, or is there a different dynamic playing out?
Yeah, I mean, realistically, we have more integrated and less integrated versus open and closed in our industry. If you take like Mercury panels, for instance, which are the panels that the software sits on from a control standpoint at the door, there are groups of software companies that have taken that on as the product that they use, and you could switch between them, but it's not like open by what most people believe as in the open. I've been saying that I'll be probably dead or retired by the time you have open, and what we'll have in the near term is more integrated on that end. I think it's one of those want conversations, wish conversations, and also like religious wars of our industry that drives a lot of emotion, and people are not wrong. I don't believe we've all done the business case conversation enough to show why it would make sense for some people to do it on that end. And then I also believe that we get a lot of hand waving from companies who are like, we're doing what's best for the customer. And you're like, all right, cool. So we'll do open systems. All right. We're like, well, all right. Like, so it's just like, it's like a bad game of poker in a lot of ways. And I do believe this is where a good example is of like, the large megatechs coming into our industry, they are now forcing a richer conversation in that direction, because it's not just open stand. Like there's many parts of the stack. So things like, I want my identity to work across. If I go from one building and I have a Linnell system, I go to another building and I have a Honeywell system, and they're even owned by the same people. I want my card or phone or whatever to work across those. Now you got middleware, some gymnastics that you have to do in order, or just know in order to make that happen, right? There's some areas. Or if I have an Android or an iOS device, I want it to work with that thing on the wall. Even they have some answers to do around standards and being able to go do that, so that I don't have to, again, be able to know that, oh, that's an Android building. Like that just doesn't work.
Yeah, and that's actually another good segue, something I wanted to talk about, maybe not a huge discussion, but when I look at access control and smart buildings, the ability to putting more on your phone is becoming a bigger part of the building being smart from an occupant point of view. And one of the newsworthy items I've seen is Apple Wallet integration. Obviously, Apple Wallet is really convenient. If you have an Apple, I guess Android has kind of the same idea. You can charge things, Android Pay. So Siemens just announced, and this was in my newsletter a couple weeks back, but Siemens announced that they're now integrating with their Building X product, which is kind of their new cloud-based smart building solution, integrating with Apple Wallet. I've seen other vendors, sometimes small vendors in the past, note we've integrated with Apple Wallet. And sometimes it sounds like it's on a building-specific basis. Sometimes it seems like it's a portfolio of buildings. Curious from your point of view, like how hard is this? How differentiated is this? How interesting is this from an access control point of view? Is that where the market is generally going? Is it just going to be a commodity where, just like every credit card can be added to an Apple Wallet, every building security system will be able to be added to Apple Wallet in the future?
Yeah. So basically what it is the ability to put your credential into the wallet and use NFC to tap and go. Like the ability to use your phone's been around. It was primarily Bluetooth in order, and it was like app driven, right? And in a lot of ways, that's how it was for a long time, predominantly because Apple didn't open up their NFC, and you couldn't have, two class citizens, those with it and those without it, if you had an Android or an iOS. So the adoption wasn't there. All of a sudden, now they've opened it up. Everybody now is having the ability to take your badge and put it in your phone. My opinion is, as fun as that might be, and it is a good user experience, it's a modality play. It's a choice play. It's going to be, there'll be cards just like there still are keys. Now, I think when you look at percentages wise, the ability to like send visitor passes and you can get into the building without having to go, fill out a piece of paper at the front desk and, do those things that we've done now, the ability to get passes. on demand. If I want to reserve an office or utilize an amenity at a residential building, whatever it might be, like that ease of use and user experience, and also having it wrapped around additional stuff like operational efficiency plays and revenue generation. It gets really interesting on what that looks like. Now, Siemens is just another a player in a long line of them that have recently introduced it. It's been primarily, I would say, project based. So, like Siemens rolled it out in their own building. In the process of doing that, they rolled it out into their tool that they're using that they now take out to other people, and they're leveraging partners in order to do a lot of that, whether it's someone like a Legic, a Swift Connect, a Wavelinks, HID, whoever it might be. You have credential creators, and then managers. I'm sorry, issuers and managers. Like, there's a lot that goes into it. It's not as easy as just saying let's do it. You got, right now we're at the early stages of it where there's even documentation that comes into play. That said, it's the first luxury good that we've had come into our industry from a mainstream standpoint that has driven a conversation that exemplifies this beyond the keeping bad people out part. Like, all of a sudden we've got cool stuff to talk about of an industry that had like nothing cool to talk about. And I've said recently, it's even been good for the biometrics world, where instantly in our industry, you talk about biometrics, dystopia like comes in, and like the utopian can't organize themselves enough to have a good point of view. This, though, now has done a wonderful job of saying, you know what? I can have a great experience and convenience while also keeping bad people out. Like, historically, our industry's been a bad experience industry, where the more doors and locks and bollards and things I can put in friction for you to get into the door, even if you're supposed to go there every single day, then we're doing our job. To now, all of a sudden, it's like, dude, I can do like everything with this. You're telling me I can't get in my building with this? Like, come on. Right? So now you have it flip. And so is it difficult? No, it isn't. But it's right now, like, when the value proposition is just putting the card in the phone, it's being seen as more expensive. There's an entire, change in behavior that's happening. There's some infrastructure changes in some cases, right? A lot of people that I think, startup companies, which are quicker to move typically on these things than large incumbents, they fill the gap of like, I have it now, because, like, let's be real. And some of these guys, their core value that they're selling doesn't have the adoption rate that they, it's not like a need, it's a nice to have. And this is a need. So they're filling that need. And so it can get distracting, but it's here. It's not going away. Everyone will have it. Now we have to start talking about what are we going to do with it.
On that note, one kind of quick follow-up question. What you were describing makes perfect sense. Underlying theme is a better tenant or occupant experience. And that has actually, on the smart building side, been a fairly big driver. I would say that when I look at how does a company selling smart building tech sell its tech, the value prop usually starts with energy, right? Like, you're going to save a lot of energy. There's a solid ROI. You're already metered for energy. You could also say like equipment efficiency, but I would say, especially after the pandemic, a big theme was occupant or tenant experience. And then I'll tell you what I think, and maybe you can tell me if you agree, and you can tell me how that relates to access control technology as well. It seemed like right after the pandemic, a lot of companies jumped in, a lot of owners of buildings, and said, let's upgrade our smart building systems in one way or another, because that'll attract people. And then 2 or 3 years later, people still were not coming back to the office. So the thought was, oh, well, I can't pay that much for this thing that didn't actually bring anyone back to the office, this solution, this technology. And now, so that led to a bit of a retrenchment of the industry. And now we're back to, oh, well, people might actually be forced or encouraged or required, or whatever term you want to use, to come back to the office. And maybe that then leads to, oh, well, because I've talked to some owners of real estate or facility people who've said, if everyone comes back, we do not have room for them, right? We've gotten rid of some office space. So then you can say, well, there's a technology solution waiting there. But it seems like it's much more cyclical, whereas everyone has been saying we save energy for years, if not decades. The experience part of this has been ebbing and flowing a little bit, though I think it's generally moving to become a bigger part of why you buy these technologies. But what do you see on the access control and security side?
Yeah, and I think it's by vertical. There's probably a different conversation per, but like if I was just looking like overriding themes, yes, overnight everybody's in the whole world seems to be moving to a hospitality like industry, no matter what you are. Like this whole idea of delivering a good experience, whether it's your office, the restaurants, the gyms you go to. Even hospitals are getting into it. Like you name it, the expectation of having a good user experience is good. And I think it's a good thing. Now, I still believe you can't have overarching good experience, but it not be safe, because again, I don't think people will go if it's like, I can get into it easily, but so can everybody else, and then bad things happen, and that'll stop people to go. So I still think there's a bedrock around safety security in the access control industry, layering on the user experience that you want, plus the policy that is needed. Because there are certain areas, like in most government, they don't want you bringing your phone into the building, or there's a higher level of assurance that is needed that it is you, whatever it might be, to go do that. Now, the energy side, I'm not an expert in that. I do see it. I know that still drives a lot. I think what drives more on our end is that whatever you put into a building, almost every single one of them has an aspect of access control. There's some, okay, so it's a utility. It's one of the things that if I can drive people to use this to get in, I now have the ability to garner their attention and communicate with them to where I can do a lot of other stuff. Whereas if I'm a tenant engagement application, it's hard to get people to download it because they have to see value in it. But if this is how I get into my building, I'm using it to get into it, right? Our industry sees that two ways. Either I'm going to work with people that will layer on top of what I'm doing some value in some systems that I don't want to go into, or I'm going to offer some things like visitor management. Maybe even we are even seeing some of them that are doing amenities booking and things like that. Or I'm going to participate in the upside experience that you're going to deliver because you're leveraging it off the top of me. So yeah, I see it as a pure technology play in a lot of ways. That is a great example of efficiencies are delivered there. Sure. Like the ability to, if you're in a high rise in any city and I have to reissue credentials, that is an utter pain in the ass that costs a lot of money. So I would rather use old technology because it's such a pain. Whereas now I can hit one button and literally send it to everybody and get a downloaded credential that updates what they need to get in based off of whatever the policy or calendar or whatever's going on in the place. So like there's efficiencies in being able to do that. And on top of it, if I can deliver a better user experience also, and let's talk about it as people are coming back to work or back to the office, not back to, everyone's been working. When I come back to the office now, if I'm forced to come after I've been working at a home and now I have to be there 2 days a week and I show up and I'm supposed to be there and I go to use my card to get in and the system doesn't work, I'm pissed off. So I do think it will start to show up on engagement surveys, like, what's your experience been? Because we're going to start seeing more of that type of stuff, right? To understand it. So this idea that you show up and it knows that it's you, or it knows you're supposed to be there and it welcomes you and there's a great experience based off of how you flow to where you need to go be, and that conference room is booked properly and you're not like standing outside in front of it being awkward waiting for someone to get out, like whatever those things are. I have a desk booked. I'm selfishly, from our industry, I think it starts with the ability to get into the building and have permission to do so. And I think making it more digital allows the building owners and enterprise or whoever the ability to paint whatever experience they want to have inside their spot.
That makes sense. Lewis, I wanted to switch gears, but do you have any follow-up questions before we do that for the last couple minutes?
Just to follow on from there, like with across real estate, obviously the return to office hybrid debate continues. Has there been any ripple effects within access control in terms of like how it's affected the space?
Yes and no. Regardless of if people are occupying a space, like they still have to protect them, right? Like it's not like they take the doors off when no one's in there. And in fact, they may even make some capital investments to make it better on that end. So you haven't seen as big. Now, part of what I talk about in some of the trends that I track, and I don't have an answer for it, is I was like, all this turbulence happened in the marketplace and all our stuff goes into that. I believe there'll be a downstream impact that happens there. Like, I don't think it won't. But there was a study that was done by Gallup recently that showed that this is the first time like ever where people are starting to feel unsafe, and because of that, new practices and products and things go into place to make it give people either truly being safer or feeling safer. So our products play into that. I've got a group of executives that I survey. All the feedback that's coming back is everyone feels pretty good about the health of the market for the next 12 months at least, and I think we will. Now, sure, there's pockets of areas. But the other thing is, if I was taking North American marketplace, if you look at a lot of people that are on like Capitol Hill in the US, a lot of them have been in real estate or have local connections back to markets that are very real estate heavy. And they don't need the bad news back home. So I could imagine there'll be some investments put in to help, make sure people are happy and businesses are still flowing and cities aren't shut down and stuff like that. So I think we'll be fine.
Yeah. The other thing that we had kind of chatted a little bit about on LinkedIn is just, and Lewis and I did a couple episodes in December of 2024 about analyst reports and rating and ranking different vendors. There are different analyst firms. There are different reports. Most of them are just, we analyze what we see in the market. There are definitely some analyst firms like Gartner, Forrester style businesses where it's really all just kind of marketing budget, right? Pay us money. We will write something nice about what you do. We will make it look strategic. I don't see that in our industry in particular, but I know that's part of just the syndicated research industry. And I think you had interacted with some of the comments and just generally had seemed to have some views on analyst reports. So one, is this also something that drives the market one way or another on the access control and security side? And then two, anything else you want to share? And I think I ask you as somebody who talks to both a lot of vendors and a lot of buyers, but doesn't publish your own reports or rankings or ratings, right? It's kind of like me. Like, I talk to a lot of buyers, I talk to a lot of users, I talk to a lot of vendors. I'm not writing reports either. So I kind of sit in between it all.
Back before this stint, we had a thing called Group 237 that was kind of like a lot of what we did here. We actually did a quadrant and created some data around ranking, but it was more of focused on potential people to be the companies you need for the future of like whatever that was, not based off of historical of what you've been, right? So it's like when people are like, who's the biggest and best company in access control? It's like, what's your ruler of like how you're grading that? And I can give you 100 different answers. Someone who has like 30 years of technology installed, so you want to sit on top of that, or somebody who will be around in the next 30 years. Those are two totally different things. So we used to do that. Now, my take on it is that what I find is there is just a massive lack of data. And I'll speak specifically to access control because I've written that I've called Omdia's market sizing of ours garbage. Like I've said it, it's been printed, whatever, fine. And the reason why I say that is I sat through a presentation where I saw the guy tell me how he does it, and they extrapolate way too much out of like employee numbers on LinkedIn, which we all know who use LinkedIn, that is like shaky ground one. Number two, when I look at the companies that they go, and our industry is so nuanced that you can't just say access control. Like I myself track 600 companies. And that's because I went out to the marketplace and found it. Every day I find new ones. So in order to do it, so our industry, it's just broken. And the other thing I would say is the nuances of the double counting in some cases because you're not close enough to it, to where in some areas of the world, Siemens would use a third-party product OEM and you would count the OEM's numbers in theirs, and it just you don't get into any of that stuff. So I believe it's so expensive to actually get the data. I don't believe the companies are giving you data, so that you're being forced to create, just like I did when my addressable market thing is like, here's how I calculated it. If you have issues with it, like tell me and we'll talk about it. But I think my calculation, because I've done the work, is as close as you're going to get. If you have a better one, fine, show it to me. Until then, we're going to hallucinate around mine because that's the one that exists. And I think what we're all doing is hallucinating around the people that have done some work in the data. And I just use it for the purpose of what it is. But this whole sort of like the market sizing is this. It's if you're being honest, we think the market sizing is this, and that's where people get pissed off, is when they're like, it's this big, and you're like, nah, dude, it's not. It's just not. We know it's not.
No, it's so interesting you say that. And I was just going to add, one of the points I think we made, Lewis and I, with James, and maybe also with Claire from Verdantix, when we talked about the report that they published end of last year, that was an interesting report. And I think, and I also shared this in my newsletter, where hundreds of companies in the smart building space. So I don't know if it's 600, 500, 700. I know James on the Nexus Marketplace probably has in that range of vendors. I could probably do so. Same order of magnitude, access control and smart buildings. I don't know, to your point, how you can actually analyze all of those companies in a way that is commercially viable. And I think that's part of the reason you get to the reports that don't include 600 companies, because to actually spend the time talking to all 600, no one is going to pay you enough money to justify that. And you can't sell enough of them, because even if you sold it to half of those 600, it's an interesting challenge beyond just the business model of the analyst firms or any kind of expert in the market. Yeah.
True. But what you could do, in my opinion, is at least recognize the parts that you're not doing, instead of pretending like you are capturing it and saying, hey, we know that this isn't like the only data, but this is the data we do have, and use it for what it is, like on that end. Like, right, like if I actually think if companies like that did that, and we're trying to do that, we're like, here's how we put it together. If people did that, you wouldn't get the answer back. The problem is it's hard to sell to, let's say, a company that is going out to raise money and needs to show some data because they have a potential investor base that's not close enough to it that wants some metrics. So they're like, I'll just buy whatever. Like just put it, like, give me anything and it sounds like it's good and solid and sound and we'll move forward. I don't know. It just sits wrong for me on that. And Verdantix does, out of all of them, does a great job. Like they really do. But it's still like there's, in the nuanced side, there's a lot of places, a lot of room still for that. And I don't know if we'll ever get there. And I don't have the appetite to go do all of it myself on the access control side either. And it's like, I'm going to give you what I can.
Yeah. I think, Lee, to wrap up, where can folks find you if they want to learn more? I know you're active on LinkedIn, other social networks. Maybe in closing, I'd just direct people to where they can learn more.
Yeah, if you go to leodess.com is one of my websites that you can get to stuff. And then on LinkedIn's the best place. Lee Odess at LinkedIn, everything that's me is there and can get you to wherever you need to be. And we'll always love to engage.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun. Really lively discussion.
Yeah, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's great to see you both. And thanks for doing what you do.
You too.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lee. Bye. Yep.